Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Real inspiration for real innovators. If you're looking for innovation and leadership transformation, your journey starts now.
Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Bourne. If you're enjoying these innovation insights, don't forget to hit subscribe and you'll never miss a future episode. By following the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast, you'll stay at the forefront of trends, strategies, and real world examples that guide today's innovators. And today's conversation is going to be no different because we're sitting down to talk to Stephanie Craig. She is not only a prolific speaker and author, but it's a treat. We've been chatting beforehand, and I think you're going to get a ton out of this. We're talking about a topic we've never had on the podcast before, which is crisis vigilance, reputation management, and leadership communication. So, Stephanie is not only a keynote speaker, but she's talked on national conferences, podcasts, and she has so much insight for us today. So, I'm so excited to talk to you, Stephanie. Welcome to the podcast. So excited to have you here.
Oh, Natalie, I am so excited to be here. Innovation and leadership are two of my favorite topics, so I can't wait to dive in.
Awesome. Well, let's start with this question. Like, how did you get your start in what you're doing? Because I would imagine that, I don't know, did you decide at a very early age you were going to do this, or was this more of a like you happenstanced into this arena?
Well, my mom used to say that I have been through every kind of natural disaster except a tsunami. And so I earned my stripes in very interesting situations. Little known fact about me. I guess actually, as I do more speaking, it's a more known fact. I was born in the Canadian Arctic. And so, actually, at one point in my youth, I lived on the Arctic Circle.
Wow.
And so, my dad was a Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer, those guys with the hats and the red jackets,
Nice.
and we moved around a ton. And just being a police officer's kid, you're just kind of exposed a little bit more to trying situations or unstable situations.
Mhm.
And when I was a teenager, it was a real, detractor, but my dad was a hostage negotiator. And I saw through him the absolute calmness in the middle of just absolute chaos. And then as I got older and I ended up in more kind of chaotic situations, 'cause I think like most people that do crisis, we come by this naturally because we are attracted to things that are problematic. I am unbelievably curious. And sometimes I think that old adage that curiosity killed the cat sometimes applies. And so, just throughout my career, I've always been the person that got to solve the problems,
Mm.
and that excited me. I spent a good number of years working in politics. I'm probably the only person you will meet that has worked in the US House and Senate and the Canadian House and Senate,
Wow.
uh, which is a huge distinction and honor that I carry because I admire public service so deeply. But through those experiences, and then quite honestly, numerous campaigns both in the US and Canada, those moments of complete, pressure and then something goes wrong, you learn really fast if you like to be in the middle of chaos and if you're good at handling it. Turns out I am. And so it became an interesting pathway for me, I think. And this is probably a lot of your guests have this epiphany a little bit earlier than I did, that if I wanted to do exactly what I wanted to do, I had to create my own thing.
Yeah. Wow, that's good.
And so I did all these jobs and I went and I did corporate turnaround and I was in a couple different, PR agencies. And I was like, this just really isn't what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And so then I went and created my own and I was super, super lucky. I ran my own company for how many years? 4 years. And my two major clients I got on the first day and they were there with me to the last day.
Wow.
And then it turns out that I wasn't the only one that loved doing what I did. And my former colleague, a man named Bill Coletti, called me and said, hey, I'm moving into more coaching. Do you want to come run my firm? I thought, absolutely, I do. And it's been really interesting as I've done this because I've actually changed my mind about crisis.
Mm. Say more about this. You were telling me about this before we hit record, and I actually thought it was really brilliant the way that you were describing this, and I'd actually never heard it talked about this way before.
Well, so everyone has heard of crisis communications. And if you're of a certain age, you watch Scandal and the absolutely lovely Kerry Washington handle all of these major crises. And you've probably heard of risk management. Well, we live in a world in between the risk managers and the crisis communicators, where we work in C suites to help people prevent crises, but also to manage them in the moment. And so if we do our job right, the crisis comms folks don't have to do anything at all.
Yeah, that's a big deal. And I've never heard anyone position it like that, but I would imagine that a leader would have to have some foresight to know that they should be reaching out to you before everything kind of hits the fan, if you will.
Well, and that honestly, Natalie, that was the epiphany I had when I took over this business. One of my favorite things, and I just adore reporters, and I know that they're, pretty much being, roasted on the spit at this point, but I love reporters. And after about 18 months of working at Kith and managing Kith, I realized I haven't talked to a reporter for work in 18 months. Why is that? And so I stood back and I said, okay, what am I doing? Like, what are we doing? And because originally we were a crisis communications firm, and I thought, well, I don't do any communicating. I help people with messaging,
Yeah.
but a lot of this is management. We help people manage, and then we dove a little bit deeper into what we do. And yes, we still answer the phone at 3 o'clock in the morning. And most of those calls are from people that don't take this advice. You can prepare for crisis.
Yeah.
And when you said leaders have to have foresight to call us, absolutely. And it's becoming a trend amongst boards, C-suites, leaders that crisis management is important. And there's a misconception, honestly, that, there's people that deal with protecting a reputation and people that deal with real, life and death crises.
Yeah.
And all of that is interconnected. That's what we've discovered. All of this is interconnected. And if you have a malfunction at your widget factory, that's a crisis. It is also a reputational crisis because your widget factory is not delivering widgets to the people you promised it to.
Mhm.
And a couple of things that I want to share with you. First of all, a company's reputation is 35% of its value.
Wow.
And the IRS even says that a company's reputation has a value.
Huh.
And then here's the thing. People use brand and reputation interchangeably, but they are not. Brand is what you pay for. Brand is your logo. Brand is your marketing department. Brand is your spokes squirrel. If you want a spoke squirrel, your reputation is not held by you. Your reputation is held by your stakeholders. And so if you are doing something that impacts your stakeholders, that is a reputational crisis.
Wow. That's really powerful. Thank you for delineating those two. I told you I thought you were going to take me to school today, and you absolutely have. And I'm getting notes, and it's great. There's a question I have, though. So, what would you say are like the top 5 things that if leaders did have foresight, they would already have you engaged in? Like, what are the top 5 things that you typically get the emergency phone call for that if they had just kept you engaged from the beginning, maybe it wouldn't have had to blow up and you wouldn't be answering that phone call at 3 in the morning?
So a lot of it is based in decision making and information. And so if folks are hearing this now and saying, okay, I want to get ahead of this,
Mhm.
a leader needs to say it's important. He or she needs to be the standard bearer of creating a crisis ready culture.
Mhm.
And then the C-suite has to prioritize it by putting it in the budget.
Yep.
I'm a business leader. I would love for people to call us, but there are ways to do this that doesn't involve calling us. So it's putting in budget in to run simulations.
Mhm.
It's creating what we call a core crisis team, where those folks understand that their job in a crisis is X. And we preach that every person on that team has to have one or two characteristics. In my ideal world, they all have both subject matter expertise and decision making power. Typically, you will see communicators on there, legal, CFO, and depending on your company, the rest of the makeup looks a little different.
Mhm.
CEO is not always on there. And the reason for that is some leaders are just such a presence that they're going to skew decision making.
Yeah.
And so we work with a college, and their decision maker, their leader, cannot be in there. So their process is, because whatever she said would be the decision. And that's not how this works.
Yeah.
And so what they elected to do was they came up, every decision has two options. She can choose between the two options, but she's not in there
Hmm.
for the decision making. On the other hand, we worked with a global energy company, and the CEO he's a presence, but he's also a welcoming presence. He very much welcomes collaboration. So his core crisis team is a collaboration.
Mhm.
So I would say budget it, leadership endorsement, core crisis team, and then to start inserting it into your regular business. And what I mean by that is at a staff meeting, hold up your phone or your iPad, or if you're still using a newspaper, hold up your newspaper or your industry publication and say to your team, what would we do if this happened to us?
Mm.
You know,
That's good.
you see your competitor on the front page of the website of your web page for not a good reason. What would we do if this happened to us?
Yeah, one of the big areas just in kind of some of the work that I do is cyber. I mean, when an organization is breached, typically what I find is that they always think like, "Oh, that will happen to somebody else, but it'll never happen to us." And that's I think the way a lot of crises work. You look
No,
at that headline and you think, "Oh, well that happened to them, but that nobody cares about us. That'll never happen to us." Instead of to your point saying, "What if it happened to us?" How would we respond? And I know part of, what you say is the first kind of 24 to 48 hours matters. And so the fact that you're running a simulation and thinking about it and creating those decisioning trees before the issue occurs, it's not something most people do, at least from what I can tell. But I believe, it makes a world of difference in your ability to respond properly.
absolutely. Well, and to tiptoe into your world a little bit, one of the things that we say, we're agnostic on crisis. Our job is to have a really big, address book of people that do the expert things.
Mhm.
And so, in our conversations with ransomware experts, that has spurred a lot of questions for us to ask our clients. So, one of our simulations, it was a global simulation, so done by Zoom because crisis, you're not flying across the country. And so, just offhandedly, I asked the head of IT, well, what's your ransomware policy? What's your ransomware insurance policy? And he just had this blank stare, and I said, "Well, you do have a ransomware policy?" And he goes, "I think so." And then all of a sudden the CEO's ears perk up and he looks at him. He's like, "You don't know if we have ransomware insurance?"
Yep.
And he's like, "I'm sure we have ransomware." And I said, "Okay, well, you need to find out a couple very important things. Do you pay? Do you not pay?
Right.
Are you allowed to talk about it? Have you decided if you are allowed to talk about it, have you decided if you're gonna talk about it? If you lose money, does your CFO know to have an equal amount of money in the rainy day fund to cover it until the insurance comes in? What are the ransomware regulations in every country that you're operating in? Who do you have to tell? What's the timeline you have to tell?" And this guy, like, I think he probably has a dartboard with my face on it at this point. Because, like, you could see that, like, his ears were steaming and the CEO's eyes were popping out because that is all the things that you can find out beforehand.
Yes.
And so these are the types of things that we talk about. If there's information that you can find out beforehand, you need to find it out
Yeah.
because in the moment you will know, okay, we know that if there's a breach and all of our computers are seized,
Mhm.
here's how we're going to communicate. If we have to, if they take to social media or if they hijack something from us, what are we going to say? How are
Yes.
we going to notify our employees? All of that can be decided. And honestly, that is what I talk about with crisis prevention. Because, like you said, the first 24 to 48 hours matter. But if you're making those decisions and trying to find out that information, that is cutting down on your ability and your time to respond.
Mhm.
So we talk
Wow.
about, well, sorry, go ahead, Natalie.
No, this is good. I'm just wowing over here.
So we talk about it this way. It's clarity plus trust equals strategic speed because
Mhm.
everybody knows that, if you have a crisis, you have to be fast. But you can't be fast when it's spinning your wheels. So we call it strategic speed because if you have clarity in who matters to you, what matters to them and who matters to them. So that means your stakeholders, your values, and then who your stakeholders value. So that's clarity, clarity basically in who you are and who you value. And then there's trust in the people, processes, and procedures that they'll all work in a time of crisis.
Hmm.
So I know exactly who I need to call if my widget factory breaks down. I'm not searching through a book. I'm not trying to rack my brain. I'm not texting, somebody else saying, who do I call? I know who to call.
Exactly. Yeah.
And my boss has faith that I will call.
Mhm.
So that trust.
This is so good. So, I want to zoom out and say, okay, how does this apply to innovation? And I want to take us back to like psychology 101. We all probably went through it in college. And if we think about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs and you think about that triangle, you cannot innovate if you're in survival mode. And you can do one or the other, right? It's like if you're fighting for food, air, water, shelter,
Mhm.
you can't innovate, you can't think ahead, you can't be creative. And so to me, this is that bottom rung or the maybe the bottom two rungs of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs of like being prepared in these situations is the difference between being able to carry on as an organization and really hit the mission and vision that you have for your organization or not. Because some of these decisions that we're talking about or the decision not to understand or know these things can cost some people the entire organization. So this is I just want to kind of bring that back into purview because what you're talking about here, even the clarity plus trust equals strategic speed. Well, why? Well, because we want to have longevity as a business beyond the crisis moment that we're in right now to live to continue to grow and expand as an organization. And so I love what we're talking about because without what you mentioned, these are the kind of the rites of passage, if you will, to actually be able to innovate is to have the clarity in a storm like this, to be able to know how to navigate the boat, to be able to know how to move out of harm's way. And so oftentimes you're right. When you ask organizations like where do we stand on these things, there's just kind of blank stares or they kind of bumble around because man, everyone's so busy trying to execute and so busy trying to move their pillars along that they're not thinking about the things that could cost them the whole entire organization in and of itself.
Absolutely. And that's why I say leadership has to buy in. But here's something that I didn't mention. So if you're prepared, if you answer all these questions beforehand and you can spot when a crisis is happening, the crisis will be shorter. While you're in the middle of the crisis, you can see your way out and start navigating your way out. Start getting back to your own business. And one of my what I call passion projects, one of my clients when I had my own company was the mayor of San Jose, California. And so being the, capital of Silicon Valley, so many of the people I worked with went off to start tech companies. And so I have a deep spot for startups. I love startups. And after having listened to me for all these years, these folks have started to implement these checks and balances into their startups. What are our values? And if we have values and we're going to tell people about our values, we better live our values. So what does our supply chain look like? What does our board look like? What does our marketing look like? Because if we are going to state a value, we better live the value.
Yeah.
So that was one of the places where crisis friction happens is if you say you have values and you're not living the values, that's where a crisis can start. So a lot of these folks are implementing it really early in their businesses. So it just becomes innate that they do these checks and balances.
Mhm. Man, this is so good, and I think that, what you're giving us is a purview into strategic leadership, thinking ahead, and really just solid risk management that, again, when these things are in place, it doesn't have to sit as like an open window in the background that you're always worrying about because you took the time to actually kind of fortify the organization in a way where you know exactly what you need to do when you need to do it. So let's maybe talk about integration into daily operations. So, how does some of the stuff that you're doing, which I think most people as they listen to this think, "Oh, okay, yeah, we'll do it," and then it just sits over there. Like, how do you think about integrating it into daily operations, into the culture, into and I know you talked a little bit about values, but maybe say more just beyond having that just written plan of attack.
let me put it this way. I say this and my staff gets mad at me that I'm not a fan of crisis plans. I say you have to have a plan, but you also have to have a culture of crisis preparedness. And this means simply making it a part, making that vigilance part of people's daily lives, holding up that iPad at staff meeting and saying, what would we do if this happened to us
Mhm.
on a, monthly basis? We have a little free Substack that we do once a month that, just sends out a crisis, 3 questions, 3 resources. So people don't even have to hold up their newspaper. They get it delivered to their inbox. But it's because we want people to do this. And so that's one of the things that you can do. I think one of the other things, even though we are no longer communicators, my respect for communicators is deep,
Mhm.
and they are really the only function in an organization that their job is to protect the reputation. And we have a very, very good example of not having a communicator at the leadership table and that being a fatal mistake, and that's Silicon Valley Bank.
Mm. Yeah.
They did not have a communicator sitting at the table, so no one could say, "Please don't say everything's okay," because you get that email and you think, "Why would you be okay?"
Right.
So that's where I see it really creating that culture is having someone in the leadership on the leadership team that their job is actually to spot problems.
Wow. This is so good. I can't believe it. We're almost out of time. Let me ask, what final thoughts would you have? What final thoughts would you leave our audience with as they maybe are thinking about their own area that they're in, right? Like some of these folks are, let's say, mid-level to higher upper management within organizations. Maybe some folks are entrepreneurial, but like if they're sitting here listening to this and thinking, oh my gosh, I've been at my organization for 10 years and haven't once heard us talk about any of these items, like what are some things that they can do to kind of affect change in the world around them?
Simply just ask to do the once a month staff meeting if this happened to us. That I think that's easy enough for people to do within their own realm. Or, when you're just kind of you have a team meeting and you're asked for your input. Can we do a little bit of a discussion about what we would do if something bad happened? Because I love what you said about, this is something that doesn't allow you to innovate. This
Yeah.
takes you away from the focus of innovating. And that is exactly it. Having something like this happen knocks you off your game, knocks your company off the game. So be the first person to say, we need to talk about this a little bit more often. And, I have a good idea.
Yeah. I love this. And I love people following your Substack and actually getting these crises sent by you guys once a month with 3 questions so that they can actually ask, their teams. They don't have to make it up. You can send something directly to them monthly that will enable them to have these conversations. Where can people find that? Where can they find and follow you?
Well, I am a big believer in LinkedIn, and I'm a little too chatty, but I'm on LinkedIn. But we will absolutely have for you in your show notes a little link to a landing page for all your audience, and we'll have a sign up for what we call it Crisis of the Month. The working title was Oh Crap, but we decided that wasn't so great. And so the Crisis of the Month, as well as some worksheets that folks may want to have just to take a look at. And for folks that are, in your audience that are building their own organization, just start doing this now so it becomes an absolute part of your culture.
That's awesome. And I kind of liked the oh crap. Well, thank you for your time today, Stephanie. This was
Well,
amazing. It was good to talk with you.
you too. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, to our listeners, thank you for joining the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. And remember, don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.
Thank you for joining us for the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our show on iTunes. Follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Innovation Meets Leadership, and visit our site at innovationmeetsleadership.com for more innovation resources.
Hey, my new book is out, Set It on Fire, The Art of Innovation. Click on the link to learn more. And don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.